The late afternoon sun spilled through the tall windows of the Blackwell mansion, painting golden streaks across the hardwood floors of the grand parlor. Grace Harper stood frozen in the middle of the room, her cleaning rag dangling from her hand like a limp flag of surrender, her breath caught somewhere between her chest and her throat. There, above the massive stone fireplace, hung a small, crooked frame she hadn't noticed before. Inside it was a drawing, Ethan's drawing. Her 5-year-old son's messy crayon scribbles showed a stick-figure family under a starry sky, a woman with wavy brown hair, a little boy with a goofy grin, and a tall man holding a lantern. Her heart thudded hard against her ribs. Nathan had hung it up. Her boss, the quiet millionaire who owned this sprawling estate in Harrington, Tennessee, had taken her kid's doodle and put it on display like it belonged here among the polished antiques and oil paintings of dead folks in fancy suits. She stepped closer, her scuffed sneakers squeaking faintly on the wood, worn from too many shifts at this place. The drawing looked so out of place, a splash of childish chaos in a room dripping with old Southern money, yet it warmed the space in a way the crackling fire never could. For a split second, Grace let herself imagine it. Her and Ethan, not just scrubbing floors and hauling trash in this mansion, but belonging here. The thought wrapped around her like a quilt on a cold night, soft and comforting, until a sharper edge cut through. Fear. Dreams like that were dangerous for a woman like her, a single mom barely scraping by in a town like Harrington. "Think you're something special now, huh?" A low voice snarled behind her, snapping her out of her haze. Grace spun around, her stomach dropping like a stone in a well. Dylan Carter, the head of security, leaned against the doorway, his thick arms crossed over his chest. His buzz-cut hair and permanent scowl made him look like a pit bull itching for a fight. He jerked his chin toward the drawing, his lip curling into a sneer. "What's that supposed to be? You moving in or something? 'Cause last I checked, you're just the maid." Her cheeks burned hot, a flush creeping up her neck. She gripped the rag tighter, forcing her voice to stay steady despite the tremor in her hands. "It's just a picture, Dylan. Ethan drew it. I didn't ask for it to be hung up." "Yeah, right," he said, stepping into the room, his work boots thumping loud against the floor. "You think you can flash that sweet little smile at Nathan and climb out of the gutter? This ain't your house, Grace. You're here to mop floors, not play family." She clenched her jaw, swallowing the urge to snap back. She couldn't afford to lose this job, not with rent overdue again, and Ethan's sneakers pinching his toes 'cause he'd outgrown them last month. "I'm not playing anything," she said, turning away to grab her cleaning caddy from the coffee table. "I've got work to do." Dylan snorted, a harsh sound that grated on her nerves. "Sure you do, princess." She felt his eyes boring into her back as she hurried out of the parlor, her heart racing like she'd just dodged a rattlesnake. The weight of his words stuck to her like the sticky Tennessee humidity outside, heavy and hard to shake. Grace Harper wasn't the type to dream big. Life had taught her early that dreams were for folks with full bank accounts, not for a 29-year-old single mom living in a rundown rental on the edge of Harrington. The little gray house with its chipped paint and sagging porch was all she could scrape together on her housekeeper's pay. Every morning she'd drag herself out of bed to the buzz of a thrift store alarm clock, brew a pot of Folgers in a chipped coffee maker that hissed like it was mad at her, and slap together a peanut butter sandwich for Ethan's breakfast. He'd sit at their wobbly kitchen table, his little legs swinging, chattering about the beetles he'd spotted in the backyard, or the next picture he wanted to draw with his Crayola stubs. That kid was her whole damn world, and she'd scrub 100 toilets to keep the lights on for him, even if it meant swallowing her pride at a place like the Blackwell mansion. The mansion was a different beast altogether. Tucked between rolling cornfields and oak woods just outside town, the estate sprawled across acres of land, its red brick walls and white columns screaming old Tennessee wealth. Inside, crystal chandeliers sparkled like fireflies caught in glass, and the air carried the sharp bite of lemon polish mixed with the musty smell of leather-bound books. Grace had been working there 6 months, pushing her cart of sprays and rags through rooms that seemed to go on forever, her footsteps muffled by rugs that probably cost more than her yearly rent. She'd learned to move quiet, to fade into the background like a shadow. Most days, she barely saw Nathan Blackwell, just glimpses of him standing on the wraparound porch with a mug of black coffee, staring out at the fields like he was waiting for something that had never come. Nathan was a puzzle she hadn't tried to solve. 42, with dark hair streaked gray at the edges and eyes that always looked a little lost, he carried himself like a man who'd forgotten how to stand tall. Folks in Harrington whispered about his wife, Sarah, who'd died of a heart condition 6 years back. Since then, he'd turned into a ghost himself, rarely leaving the estate. Grace figured he kept her around because she didn't poke her nose where it didn't belong. Until that drawing showed up, she'd thought he barely knew she existed. She shook her head, shoving the thought down as she hauled her cleaning supplies into the kitchen. The room was a beast, all stainless steel and granite, with a big window overlooking the overgrown garden out back. Her beat-up radio sat on the counter, crackling with a Blake Shelton tune she didn't bother to switch. Music was her lifeline, drowning out the ache in her back and the constant buzz of worry in her gut. Rent was due in a week, and she was still $200 short. Ethan's daycare lady, Miss Ruth, had been a godsend watching him today, but Grace hated leaning on her so much. She needed this gig, plain and simple. "Hey, girl, you look like you're hauling a tractor uphill." A cheerful voice broke through the twangy chorus. Grace glanced up to see Maggie Sullivan leaning against the counter, her gardening gloves stuffed into the pocket of her faded overalls. Maggie was the estate's landscaper, a wiry woman with a freckled face and a grin that could light up a thunderstorm. She was the closest thing Grace had to a friend here, always quick with a joke or a cold Coke on a hot day. "Just another Monday," Grace said, forcing a smile as she sprayed Windex on the sink. "Ethan's with Miss Ruth again. I hate dumping him on her all the time." Maggie grabbed a rag and started wiping the counter, unasked, her boots leaving little dirt smudges on the tile. "You're doing what you gotta do, hun. That boy's lucky to have a mama like you. And hey, if Nathan ever clocks how hard you bust your tail, I bet he'd slip you a raise." She winked, her green eyes twinkling. Grace let out a short, dry laugh. "Yeah, right. He barely knows my name. I'm just here to keep the dust off his fancy junk." "Uh-huh," Maggie said, smirking like she knew something Grace didn't. "Tell that to the guy who hung Ethan's masterpiece up in the parlor. I saw it this morning. Cute as a button. He's got an eye for you, mark my words." Grace's stomach did a little flip, and she scrubbed harder at a non-existent spot on the sink. "Maggie, don't. I can't afford rumors. Dylan already thinks I'm scheming something." Maggie rolled her eyes so hard Grace thought they might pop out. "Dylan thinks everybody's out to get him. Ignore that jackass. He's just sore 'cause Nathan don't give him a pat on the head every 5 minutes. "Maybe," Grace muttered, her hands moving on autopilot. She didn't want to think about Nathan noticing her, not like that. She just wanted to clock in, clock out, and get home to Ethan without any trouble. The rest of her shift dragged on, the heat pressing against the mansion's windows like it was trying to claw its way inside. She dusted the towering bookshelves in the library, swept the wide staircase with its creaky banister, and wiped down the dining room table that could seat 20, but never did. Her mind wandered as she worked, picturing Ethan at Miss Ruth's, probably drawing ladybugs or chasing her old tabby cat around the trailer. He was a good kid, bright, curious, always asking questions she didn't have answers for, like why his daddy wasn't around. She'd fed him the short version. "He had to go away, buddy," skipping the part where Caleb had walked out with her last $300 and a grin that still haunted her nightmares. By the time she clocked out, her arms ached and her t-shirt stuck to her back with sweat. She grabbed her stuff, the radio, her caddy, her frayed purse, and headed for the front door. The mansion was quiet, just the hum of the AC and the faint drone of cicadas outside. She stepped onto the gravel driveway, the evening breeze cooling her damp skin, and started the trek home past the cornfields swaying in the dusk. That drawing wouldn't leave her alone, though. Why had Nathan hung it up? Was it just a nice guy thing, or did it mean something more? She didn't know if she wanted it to mean anything. Life was hard enough without complications, without Dylan breathing down her neck or her own dumb heart daring to hope for something she couldn't have. As the sky turned pink and orange over Harrington, she made up her mind. Tomorrow, she'd keep her head down, do her job, and stay out of trouble. That was the plan, at least. The Saturday sun burned high over Harrington, turning the gravel driveway outside the Blackwell mansion into a shimmering ribbon of heat. Grace Harper gripped Ethan's small, sticky hand as they crunched up to the big oak doors, her stomach twisting with a cocktail of nerves and something she couldn't quite pin down. All week, that damn drawing on the parlor wall had haunted her, a quiet gesture from Nathan Blackwell that felt too big, too kind for her to wrap her head around. And now here she was, stepping into his world on her day off, Ethan tugging her along like a puppy on a leash, his sneakers kicking up dust with every bounce. "Mama, are we going to see the big house again?" Ethan asked, his brown eyes wide as saucers. He clutched a peanut butter-stained sketchbook under one arm, the crayons in his pocket rattling like loose change. "Yeah, buddy," Grace said, forcing a smile to hide the jitters. "Mr. Nathan's got a surprise for you." The door swung open before she could knock, and there stood Nathan, looking less like a millionaire and more like a regular guy in a faded UT Volunteers t-shirt and jeans speckled with old paint. His dark hair was mussed, and he held a paint roller in one hand like he'd already been at it. "Hey, y'all made it," he said, his voice warm as a glass of sweet tea on a porch swing. He crouched down to Ethan's level, grinning. "You must be the artist I've been hearing so much about." Ethan blinked, suddenly shy and half hid behind Grace's leg, peeking out with one eye. "Hi," he mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. Nathan chuckled, a low, easy sound that cut through the humid air. "No need to be bashful, little man. I've got something special for you today. Come on in." Grace followed him inside, Ethan clinging to her side as they crossed the grand foyer, the cool blast of AC a relief against her sweaty skin. The air smelled different today, a sharp tang of pine and paint thinner mixing with the usual lemon polish. Nathan led them past the staircase with its polished banister and down a hallway Grace rarely cleaned, stopping at a closed door near the back of the house. "This used to be a guest room," he said, resting his hand on the knob. "Been sitting empty too long. Thought we could fix it up for Ethan." He pushed the door open, and Grace's breath hitched. The room was a mess. Dust clung to the corners like cobwebs, faded floral wallpaper peeled at the edges, and a single window let in a thin slice of sunlight that danced with floating specks. Stacks of paint cans, brushes, and drop cloths sat piled in the corner next to a cardboard box labeled bedding in Nathan's messy scrawl. He picked up a can of forest green paint and pried it open with a screwdriver, the lid popping off with a soft clink. "What do you say, Ethan? Want to turn this into your own spot?" Ethan's shyness melted away like ice cream on a July sidewalk. "Can we make it like a forest?" he asked, bouncing on his toes, his voice ringing with excitement. "With bugs and trees and everything?" Nathan's grin widened, crinkling the corners of his gray eyes. "You bet. I even got some sheets with critters on them to match. Let's get to it." They spent the next few hours turning chaos into something alive. Grace taped off the edges with blue painter's tape, her fingers sticking to the roll as she stretched it along the baseboards. Nathan tackled the high spots with the roller, his long arms making quick work of the walls, green paint dripping like moss onto the drop cloths below. Ethan got a little brush of his own, slapping paint on the lower half with more gusto than grace, the green streaking across his cheeks and splattering his old Batman t-shirt. He giggled every time a drop hit the floor, a high-pitched sound that bounced off the bare walls and made Grace's chest ache with something soft and unfamiliar. She couldn't help but laugh, too, the sound bubbling up despite the weight she'd been carrying all week. For once, she wasn't counting nickels and dimes or dodging Dylan's glares. The Saturday sun burned high over Harrington, turning the gravel driveway outside the Blackwell mansion into a shimmering ribbon of heat. Grace Harper gripped Ethan's small, sticky hand as they crunched up to the big oak doors, her stomach twisting with a cocktail of nerves and something she couldn't quite pin down. All week, that damn drawing on the parlor wall had haunted her. A quiet gesture from Nathan Blackwell that felt too big, too kind for her to wrap her head around. And now here she was, stepping into his world on her day off, Ethan tugging her along like a puppy on a leash, his sneakers kicking up dust with every bounce. "Mama, are we going to see the big house again?" Ethan asked, his brown eyes wide as saucers. He clutched a peanut butter-stained sketchbook under one arm, the crayons in his pocket rattling like loose change. "Yeah, buddy," Grace said, forcing a smile to hide the jitters. "Mr. Nathan's got a surprise for you." The doors swung open before she could knock, and there stood Nathan, looking less like a millionaire and more like a regular guy in a faded UT Volunteers t-shirt and jeans speckled with old paint. His dark hair was mussed, and he held a paint roller in one hand, like he'd already been at it. "Hey, y'all made it," he said, his voice warm as a glass of sweet tea on a porch swing. He crouched down to Ethan's level, grinning. "You must be the artist I've been hearing so much about." Ethan blinked, suddenly shy, and half hid behind Grace's leg, peeking out with one eye. "Hi," he mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. Nathan chuckled, a low, easy sound that cut through the humid air. "No need to be bashful, little man. I've got something special for you today. Come on in." Grace followed him inside, Ethan clinging to her side as they crossed the grand foyer, the cool blast of AC a relief against her sweaty skin. The air smelled different today, a sharp tang of pine and paint thinner mixing with the usual lemon polish. Nathan led them past the staircase with its polished banister and down a hallway Grace rarely cleaned, stopping at a closed door near the back of the house. "This used to be a guest room," he said, resting his hand on the knob. "Been sitting empty too long. Thought we could fix it up for Ethan." He pushed the door open, and Grace's breath hitched. The room was a mess. Dust clung to the corners like cobwebs, faded floral wallpaper peeled at the edges, and a single window let in a thin slice of sunlight that danced with floating specks. Stacks of paint cans, brushes, and drop cloths sat piled in the corner, next to a cardboard box labeled bedding in Nathan's messy scrawl. He picked up a can of forest green paint and pried it open with a screwdriver, the lid popping off with a soft clink. "What do you say, Ethan? Want to turn this into your own spot?" Ethan's shyness melted away like ice cream on a July sidewalk. "Can we make it like a forest?" he asked, bouncing on his toes, his voice ringing with excitement. "With bugs and trees and everything?" Nathan's grin widened, crinkling the corners of his gray eyes. "You bet. I even got some sheets with critters on 'em to match. Let's get to it." They dove in, turning chaos into something alive. Grace taped off the edges with blue painter's tape, her fingers sticking to the roll as she stretched it along the baseboards. Nathan tackled the high spots with the roller, his long arms making quick work of the walls, green paint streaking across the peeling paper like moss reclaiming an old tree. Ethan got a little brush of his own, slapping paint on the lower half with more enthusiasm than skill, green splattering his cheeks and the knees of his overalls. He giggled every time a drop hit the drop cloth, a high-pitched sound that bounced off the bare walls and made Grace's chest ache in a good way. The room smelled sharp and new, the paint fumes mixing with the musty scent of years left untouched. Sunlight streamed through the window, catching the dust motes in a golden haze, and Grace's radio, dragged along from her cleaning cart, crackled with a Luke Combs tune, the twangy guitar filling the quiet. She caught herself humming along, her shoulders loosening for the first time all week, the weight of Dylan's words and the overdue rent slipping away in the rhythm of the brushstrokes. Nathan set his roller down on a paint tray, wiping his hands on a rag stained with a dozen old projects. He glanced at Ethan, who was now painting a wobbly tree trunk with a tongue sticking out in concentration. "You're a natural, kid," Nathan said, crouching beside him. "Ever think about being a painter when you grow up?" Ethan scrunched his nose, leaving a green smear on his cheek as he wiped it with his sleeve. "Nah, I want to catch bugs. Like a bug scientist. But this is fun, too." He waved his brush, flinging a speck of paint onto Nathan's jeans. "Oops," Grace said, grabbing a damp cloth from her caddy. "Sorry about that." Nathan waved her off, laughing, a deep, rolling sound that felt like it belonged in a bar on a Friday night, not this dusty old mansion. "No harm done. Reminds me of a trip I took with Sarah down to Alabama. We tried painting a fishing shack we rented one summer. Ended up with more paint on us than the walls. Best week of my life." His voice softened, his eyes drifting to some far-off place Grace couldn't follow. She paused, the cloth hovering over his knee. She'd heard whispers about Sarah, Nathan's wife, gone 6 years now from a bad heart. But he'd never talked about her like this, not with her. "Sounds like a good time," she said quietly, careful not to push. "Yeah," he murmured, then shook his head like he was shaking off a ghost. "Anyway, this room's looking great already. Y'all are bringing it to life." Ethan dropped his brush into the can with a plop, green paint splashing up the side. "It's gonna be the best forest ever, Mama. Like we live here." He spun around, arms out like he was hugging the whole room. Grace's chest tightened, a pang she couldn't name. "It's just for playing in, buddy," she said, ruffling his sweaty hair. "We've got our own place." "But it's so cool." Ethan darted to the window, pressing his nose to the smudged glass. "Look, there's a garden, too. Can we go out there later?" "Sure thing," Nathan said, setting the bedding box on the floor. He pulled out a set of sheets covered in little cartoon beetles and fireflies, holding them up for Ethan to see. "What do you think? Fit for a bug scientist's forest?" Ethan's eyes lit up like Christmas lights on Main Street. "Yes! It's perfect!" He snatched the pillowcase and hugged it tight, then spun around and threw his arms around Nathan's legs, nearly knocking him over. "You're my best friend, Mr. Nathan." Grace froze, her breath catching sharp in her throat. Nathan blinked, clearly caught off guard, his hands hovering for a second before he crouched down and patted Ethan's back. "Well, shoot, little man. That's the nicest thing anybody said to me in a long time." Ethan grinned, oblivious to the lump rising in Grace's throat, his little face glowing with pure, unfiltered joy. She turned away quick, pretending to fuss with the paint cans, but her eyes stung hot with tears. Seeing Ethan so happy, so free, hit her like a freight train. He deserved this, a day without her worrying about the electric bill or the next shift, a man who didn't walk out when the going got tough. But could she trust it? Could she let herself believe Nathan meant it when he smiled like that, all soft and steady? "You okay over there?" Nathan's voice cut through her spiral, gentle but close enough to make her jump. She swiped at her face with her sleeve, forcing a nod. "Yeah, just dust or something. Thanks for this, Nathan. It means a lot to him." "Means a lot to me, too," he said, standing up slow, his gaze lingering on her a beat too long. "I've been rattling around this place alone too long. hearing him laugh. Hell, hearing you hum along to Luke Combs. It's like the house is waking up. She managed a small smile, her heart thudding hard. Didn't know I was that loud. You're not, he teased, a flicker of a grin tugging at his lips. But it's a good sound. By the time they finished, the room glowed with fresh green paint, the air thick with the sharp bite of it. Ethan darted around, pointing out his favorite spots, the wobbly tree, the corner where he'd smeared a ladybug, his sneakers leaving little green footprints on the drop cloth. Grace and Nathan cleaned up, folding the cloths and stacking the cans, her hands moving on autopilot while her mind spun. This felt too good, too easy, like the first sip of cold lemonade on a scorching day. She'd learned the hard way that good things didn't stick around. Caleb had taught her that when he'd taken her last $300 and bolted, leaving her 7 months pregnant and broke as hell. All right, Picasso, she called to Ethan, slinging her purse over her shoulder. Time to head home. Ah, Mama, can't we stay? He whined, clutching the beetle pillowcase like a lifeline. Not tonight, buddy. We've got church tomorrow. She glanced at Nathan, who was wiping down the last paintbrush over a bucket. Thanks again. This was real nice. Any time, he said, straightening up, his hands stuffed in his pockets. Y'all are welcome here. You know that, right? Doors always open. She nodded, her throat tight. Appreciate it. They stepped outside, the evening air thick with the hum of cicadas and the sweet tang of honeysuckle drifting from the garden. Ethan skipped ahead, chattering about fireflies and forests, while Grace trailed behind, her sneakers crunching on the gravel. She wanted to believe Nathan, wanted to sink into this warmth like a worn-out couch, but the fear gnawed at her, sharp and familiar. What if it all fell apart? As they reached the edge of the driveway, she glanced back at the mansion. A shadow moved in the kitchen window, Dylan watching them. His silhouette was still, but even from here she could feel the heat of his glare, like a storm brewing on the horizon. Her stomach sank. Whatever this day had been, this bright, perfect bubble, it wasn't over yet. Hey, y'all. Ethan just melted Nathan's heart, and maybe Grace's too. But what's Dylan got up his sleeve? That guy's trouble waiting to happen. Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment with your guesses. I'm dying to hear what you think. Stick around, 'cause this story's about to heat up. Monday morning rolled into Harrington like a freight train, the air thick with humidity and the promise of a long, sweaty week. Grace Harper dragged herself out of bed at the crack of dawn, the creak of the floorboards under her bare feet a familiar groan in their little rental house. She brewed a pot of Folgers in her chipped coffee maker, the bitter smell cutting through the stale air, and slapped together a peanut butter sandwich for Ethan's breakfast. He sat at the wobbly kitchen table, still half asleep, his crayons scattered across a new drawing of a forest full of bugs. Is Mr. Nathan gonna come see us today, Mama? He mumbled, rubbing his eyes with a fist. Not today, buddy, Grace said, pressing a quick kiss to his forehead. He's got his big house to run. We're heading to Miss Ruth's. Then I've got to work. Ethan nodded, too sleepy to argue, and she hustled him out the door, his little backpack bouncing as they trudged the half-mile to Miss Ruth's trailer. The old woman greeted them with a warm smile and a plate of biscuits fresh from the oven, her gray hair pulled back in a loose bun. Y'all take care now, Miss Ruth said, patting Ethan's head. Grace forced a smile, but guilt gnawed at her like a splinter. Miss Ruth was a saint, but she had her own life. How long could Grace keep dumping Ethan on her like this? By the time she reached the Blackwell mansion, the sun was climbing high, baking the red brick walls until they shimmered. She pushed her cleaning cart through the front doors, the cool blast of AC hitting her like a lifeline against her sweaty skin. The place was quiet, save for the faint twang of her radio playing an old Garth Brooks tune, something about thunder rolling and hearts breaking. She set to work in the dining room, dusting the long oak table that never saw a meal, and wiping down the crystal chandelier that glittered like a Tennessee sunset. Her mind drifted back to Saturday. Ethan's laughter echoing in that green-painted room, Nathan's easy smile, the way the paint had stuck to her hands like a promise. It had been a good day, maybe too good. She couldn't let herself get used to it. Heavy footsteps thudded behind her, sharp and deliberate, pulling her out of her thoughts. She turned, and there was Dylan Carter, his arms crossed tight, his jaw set like he was chewing on something sour. He held a steaming mug of coffee in one hand, the dark liquid sloshing as he glared at her through narrowed eyes. "Morning, princess," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm thick enough to spread on toast. "Have a nice little weekend with the boss?" Grace stiffened, gripping her rag until her knuckles whitened. "It was for Ethan, Dylan. You saw the room." "Yeah, I saw it," he snapped, stepping closer, his boots scuffing the polished floor. "Saw you cozying up, acting like you belong here. You think you're slick, don't you? Playing the poor single mom card to get in Nathan's good graces." Her cheeks flushed hot, anger bubbling up her throat. "I'm not playing anything. I'm here to work, same as you." "Work, huh?" He smirked, then, quick as a snake striking, tipped his mug. Coffee splashed across the cream rug she'd just vacuumed, a dark stain spreading like spilled ink. "Oops. Guess you missed a spot." Grace's mouth dropped open, her pulse hammering in her ears. "What the hell, Dylan?" "Better clean it up," he said, turning on his heel with a lazy shrug. "Wouldn't want Nathan thinking you're slacking." She stood there, fists clenched, watching him saunter out like he owned the place. Her hands shook as she grabbed a bottle of carpet cleaner from her cart and dropped to her knees, scrubbing at the stain with a fury she hadn't felt in years. The sharp smell of chemicals burned her nose, but it couldn't drown out the memory flashing through her mind. Caleb laughing as he stuffed her last $300 into his pocket and walked out, leaving her sobbing in their old apartment. "You're on your own, darling," he'd said, his boots crunching gravel as he disappeared. She'd been scrubbing ever since, trying to hold her life together with spit and grit. And now Dylan was pulling the same crap, kicking her when she was down. She kept her head low the rest of the morning, moving from room to room like a ghost. The coffee stain came out after 10 minutes of elbow grease, but the knot in her stomach stayed put, twisting tighter with every creak of the mansion's old bones. She couldn't shake Dylan's words, or the way they echoed her own fears. What if he was right? What if Nathan's kindness was just pity, and she was fooling herself thinking it meant more? She'd felt the stares from the other staff lately, the cooks muttering in the kitchen, the gardeners glancing her way. And now she knew why. Dylan was planting seeds, and they were taking root. By noon, she was in the kitchen, wiping down the granite counters, the radio humming a slow Miranda Lambert song about broken hearts and burned bridges. Maggie poked her head in, her gardening gloves dangling from her overalls pocket. "Hey, hun, you look like a thundercloud rolled over you," she said, peeling off the gloves and tossing them on the counter. "What's up?" Grace sighed, leaning against the sink, her rag twisting in her hands. "Dylan, he's got it out for me. Dumped coffee on the rug just to mess with me, then acted like it was my fault." Maggie's jaw dropped, her freckled face scrunching up. "That son of a... You tell Nathan yet?" "No way," Grace said, shaking her head hard. "I can't run to him like some kid tattling. He'll think I can't handle my own problems." Maggie crossed her arms, leaning on the counter like she was settling in for a fight. "Girl, Dylan's been a thorn in everybody's side since day one. You remember how he got all pissy when Nathan wouldn't give him that bonus a couple years back? Said he wasn't loyal enough. Now he's taking it out on you 'cause Nathan's sweet on you." "He's not sweet on me," Grace muttered, though her pulse quickened at the thought. "He's just being nice." "Nice, my ass," Maggie said with a grin that could melt ice. "Hanging up Ethan's picture? Letting y'all paint a room? That ain't just nice, that's personal. You need to stand up to Dylan, Grace. Show him you're not scared." Grace stared at the counter, her rag now a damp knot in her hands. If I push back, he'll make it worse. I can't lose this job, Maggie. Ethan needs me to keep it together. Maggie softened, stepping closer, her voice dropping low. I get it, hun. I do. But you can't let him walk all over you either. I've been where you are. First week here, Dylan accidentally locked me out of the shed for a whole shift. Nearly got me fired. Don't let him win. Think about it, okay? Yeah, Grace said, though she knew she wouldn't. Fighting Dylan meant risking everything, and she'd spent too long patching this fragile little life together to let it crack now. The afternoon dragged on, the heat pressing against the mansion's windows like a living thing, thick and relentless. Grace swept the back porch, the bristles of her broom scraping against the weathered wood, her mind a tangle of worry. She kept picturing Ethan's forest room, the way Nathan had knelt down to hand him those bug sheets, his big hands careful with the fabric. It had felt like a dream, one she didn't deserve to keep dreaming. Dylan's sneer kept creeping in, poisoning it like rust on a clean blade. She was hauling her cart back inside when Nathan appeared in the hallway, a mug of black coffee steaming in his hand. "Hey, Grace," he said, his voice easy as a Sunday morning. "How's it going today?" "Fine," she lied, forcing a smile that felt brittle on her lips. "Just keeping busy." He nodded, his eyes lingering on her a beat too long, like he could see the cracks she was hiding. "Ethan talking about that room nonstop yet?" She chuckled despite herself, the sound slipping out soft. "Oh yeah, keeps asking when we can go back and add more bugs." "Anytime he wants," Nathan said, sipping his coffee, the steam curling up around his face. "Kid's got a spark. Reminds me of Sarah. She loved making things her own too." Grace's throat tightened. She wanted to ask about Sarah, to peel back that quiet sadness in his voice, but the words stuck. "He's a handful," she said instead. "Thanks for giving him that." "Pleasure's mine," he replied, then hesitated, his brow furrowing slightly. "You sure you're okay? Look like you're carrying something heavy." For a second, she almost told him. About Dylan, the coffee, the way her chest felt like it was caving in under the weight of it all. But then she caught Dylan's shadow passing the end of the hall, and she swallowed it down hard. "Just tired," she said, her voice flat. "Long week." He frowned, like he didn't quite buy it, but nodded anyway. "All right, take it easy, huh?" "Sure," she said, and watched him walk off, her heart sinking deeper into the pit of her stomach. By the time she clocked out, the sky was turning purple over the cornfields, the cicadas screaming in the oaks. She slung her purse over her shoulder and started the trek home, her sneakers scuffing the dirt road. She'd just picked up Ethan from Miss Ruth's, his chatter about a cricket he'd caught filling the silence, when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She fished it out, expecting a reminder from Miss Ruth, but it was a text from her landlord, short and brutal. "Rent's going up $75 next month. Pay on time, or you're out." Her stomach dropped like a rock in a pond. She stopped dead in the road, Ethan tugging at her hand, and stared at the screen. 200 short was bad enough. Now, 275. She couldn't breathe. Ethan looked up, his little brow furrowing. "Mama, what's wrong?" "Nothing, buddy," she said, forcing her voice steady as she shoved the phone back in her pocket. "Let's get home." But as they walked, the weight of it all pressed down. Dylan's sabotage, the rent hike, the fragile hope she'd let slip in with Nathan. Something had to give, and she was terrified it'd be her. The week crawled by in a haze of sweat and worry, the Tennessee heat pressing down on Harrington like a damp quilt. Grace Harper moved through her days on autopilot, dropping Ethan at Miss Ruth's with a quick hug, hauling her cleaning cart around the Blackwell mansion, scrubbing floors until her knuckles ached red. Dylan kept his distance after the coffee stunt, but she felt his eyes on her every time she turned a corner, a silent promise of more trouble brewing. The landlord's text about the rent hike burned in her mind like a lit fuse. $275 short now, and no way to make it up unless she started panning for gold in the creek behind her rental. Friday afternoon found her in the mansion's library, a cavern of dark walnut shelves and leather-bound books that smelled like time and dust. She ran her rag along the rows, the faint hum of a Dolly Parton tune drifting from her radio on the side table. Something about working 9 to 5 and barely getting by. She was halfway through wiping down a set of encyclopedias, their gold lettering faded from years of neglect, when the door creaked open. Maggie Sullivan poked her head in, her gardening gloves tucked under her arm, a smudge of dirt streaking her freckled cheek. "Hey, hon," Maggie said, stepping inside and shutting the door with a soft click. "Got a sec?" Grace straightened, brushing a strand of hair from her sweaty forehead with the back of her hand. "Sure. What's up?" Maggie hesitated, chewing her lip like she was wrestling with something, then lowered her voice to a hush. "I wasn't gonna say nothing, but I overheard something yesterday about you." Grace's stomach twisted, a cold prickle running down her spine. "Dylan again?" "Nope," Maggie said, shaking her head, her eyes narrowing with concern. "Nathan. He was on the phone with somebody. Sounded like your landlord, Mr. Hargrove. Said he'd cover your rent for the next couple months. Told Hargrove to keep it quiet like you weren't supposed to know." The rag slipped from Grace's hand, hitting the floor with a soft thud. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over Dolly's crooning. Maggie nodded, her freckled face tight. "I'm guessing he paid that extra $75, too. Hargrove was grumbling about it, but Nathan shut him down fast." Grace's knees went weak, and she sank onto the edge of an armchair, the leather creaking under her weight. Her head spun like a top. Nathan had paid her rent? Without telling her? The room felt too small, the walls pressing in, the air thick with the musty scent of old books and her own rising panic. All week she'd been scrambling, counting pennies, lying awake staring at the cracked ceiling of her rental, and he'd just fixed it, like she was some charity case he could toss cash at. Anger flared hot in her chest, tangled with a sick twist of shame. She'd fought tooth and nail to stand on her own, and now this? "You okay?" Maggie asked, crouching beside her, her voice soft. "You look like you're gonna hurl." "I'm fine," Grace lied, her voice shaking like a leaf in a storm. I can't believe he'd do that behind my back." Maggie frowned, resting a hand on Grace's knee. "Maybe he thought he was helpin'. He's got a soft spot for you and Ethan, you know that." "Helpin'?" Grace snapped, standing up so fast the chair rocked back. "He's controlling me, Maggie. I didn't ask for this. I don't want his pity." She grabbed her rag from the floor and stormed out, her pulse pounding in her ears like a drum. She needed air and answers. She found Nathan in the garden, standing by a tangle of overgrown rose bushes, a pair of shears in his hand. The late afternoon sun painted the sky a blazing orange, casting long shadows across the patchy grass and the oak trees lining the property. His faded flannel shirt was rolled up to his elbows, and he looked up as she marched toward him, her sneakers slapping the stone path with every furious step. His brow furrowed, the shears dipping slightly. "Grace? Everything all right?" "No," she said, stopping a few feet away, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Did you pay my rent?" His face went still, the shears dropping a fraction more. For a second, he didn't say anything, just studied her with those quiet gray eyes that always seemed to see too much. Then he sighed, setting the tool down on a weathered bench beside him. "Yeah, I did." Her breath hitched, fury spilling over like a pot boiling over on the stove. Why? Why the hell would you do that without asking me? Grace, He stepped closer, but she threw up a hand, stopping him cold. No, you don't get to talk yet, she shouted, her voice trembling with the weight of it all. I've been killing myself to keep my head above water, Nathan. Counting every dime, lying awake wondering how I'm gonna feed Ethan. And you just swoop in like I'm some damsel you can save. I don't need your money. It's not about that, he said, his voice low but firm, cutting through her storm. I saw you struggling. That day you said you were tired. I knew it was more than that. I didn't want you and Ethan losing your place. So you lied? She shot back, tears stinging her eyes, hot and unwanted. You went behind my back and paid Hargrove like I'm your little project? I'm not a toy, Nathan. I don't want you pulling strings in my life. He flinched, running a hand through his hair, the gray strands catching the fading light. I wasn't trying to control you. I just... Damn it, Grace. I've lost too much already. Sarah's gone. This house is a graveyard, and I can't stand seeing you hurting when I can do something about it. She froze, the raw edge in his voice slicing through her anger like a knife. He took a shaky breath, his gaze dropping to the dirt at his feet. When she died, I shut down. Didn't let anybody in. Then you and Ethan showed up. You with that quiet fight in you, him with that big old grin. And it's like I remembered what living feels like. I'm not pitying you. I'm scared of losing you too. Grace's throat closed up, tears spilling down her cheeks despite her best efforts to hold them back. She wiped them away with a furious swipe, mad at herself for crying, for feeling the ache in his words. She wanted to scream, to tell him he didn't get to unload that on her. But part of her got it. She knew what it was to lose everything, to build walls so high nobody could climb them. She'd done it too after Caleb left her sobbing on that apartment floor, 7 months pregnant and broke. I don't need you to save me, she said finally, her voice trembling but steady. I've been holding it together since Caleb took off with my last dime. I can't owe anybody, Nathan. Not again. You don't owe me, he said, stepping closer, his eyes locking on hers with an intensity that made her chest tighten. It's not a debt. It's just... hell. It's just me wanting you and that boy to be okay. You're not alone in this, Grace, even if you think you have to be. She shook her head, backing up a step, the damp grass brushing her ankles. I don't know how to do this. Trusting people, it's burned me before. I gotta keep my feet under me. He nodded, slow and sad, his hands falling to his sides. I get it. I won't push. But I'm here, all right? No strings. She swallowed hard, the fight draining out of her like water through a sieve. I need time, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And no more secrets. Fair enough, he replied, his tone soft as the breeze rustling the oaks. The rest of her shift passed in a blur, her hands moving through the motions, wiping counters, sweeping floors, while her mind churned like a storm over the Smokies. Nathan's words stuck to her like burrs on a sock, the loneliness, the fear, the way he'd looked at her like she was more than just the maid. She saw it in his eyes, that same hollow she'd carried since Caleb walked out. But trust? That was a bridge she wasn't sure she could cross, not with Dylan's shadow lurking and the rent still looming like a guillotine. When she clocked out, she grabbed her purse and headed for the door, her steps heavy on the hardwood. Nathan caught her in the foyer, his expression cautious, like he was stepping around a skittish horse. Hey, Ethan still want to come by tomorrow? He asked, scratching the back of his neck. I promised him we'd check out the garden, maybe catch some fireflies. She hesitated, her heart tugging hard. Ethan deserved that joy, even if she was a mess inside. "Yeah," she said finally, avoiding his gaze. "He can come. But I'm not staying for supper or nothing. Just dropping him off." "All right," Nathan said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I'll take what I can get." She nodded, her throat tight, and stepped out into the dusk. The air was thick with the buzz of crickets, the sky streaked with purple over the cornfields. As she walked home, Ethan's chatter about crickets echoing in her head when she picked him up from Miss Ruth's, she felt the walls she'd built wobble, just a little. But they didn't fall, not yet. That night, after tucking Ethan into his lumpy twin bed, Grace sat on the sagging couch in their rental, staring at a crack in the ceiling that looked like a lightning bolt. She'd found a small wooden music box in her purse, one she'd picked up from Ethan's new room on Saturday, and opened it, letting the tinny notes of Amazing Grace fill the quiet. Inside was a folded note in a woman's handwriting. "Let this house be a haven for whoever needs it most. S." Sarah's words, she figured. Her chest ached, a mix of anger and something softer she couldn't name. She closed the box, set it on the coffee table, and buried her face in her hands. Trust was a leap she wasn't ready for, but Ethan's smile tomorrow might just push her closer to the edge. "Hey, y'all." Grace just faced off with Nathan, and that music box might change everything. But will she jump or run? Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment with your take. I'm itching to hear what you think. This story's twisting up, so don't miss the next turn. The weekend slipped through Harrington like a fleeting breeze, leaving Grace Harper with a restless ache she couldn't shake. Saturday had been a quiet drop-off. She'd walked Ethan to the Blackwell mansion, watched him scamper off with Nathan to chase fireflies in the garden, and bolted before Nathan's warm smile could pull her in deeper. She'd spent the day alone in her rental, scrubbing the kitchen counter for the third time, the bleach smell stinging her nose as she tried to drown out the noise in her head. Nathan's confession about paying her rent still stung like a fresh cut, but his words about loneliness echoed louder, rattling around her skull. She didn't know what to feel. Mad, grateful, scared. So she felt it all at once, a storm she couldn't outrun. Monday rolled in gray and muggy, the sky over the cornfields threatening rain. Grace dropped Ethan at Miss Ruth's with a quick hug, his chatter about fireflies fading as she trudged to work, her sneakers scuffing the damp dirt road. The mansion loomed ahead, its red brick dulled by the overcast light, the white columns looking more tired than grand today. She pushed her cleaning cart inside, the familiar hum of the AC greeting her, and set to work in the parlor. Her radio played a low Keith Urban tune, the gravelly voice a thin comfort against the unease prickling her skin. She'd barely started dusting the mantel when she caught whispers from the hall, sharp, clipped voices she couldn't quite make out. She edged closer to the doorway, rag in hand, and peeked out. Two groundskeepers, Hank and Lila, stood by the staircase, their heads bent together like conspirators. "Heard she's got Nathan wrapped around her finger," Lila muttered, her voice low and sour. "Dylan says she's playing him for a payout." Hank snorted, adjusting his ball cap. "Figures. Single mom with a sob story. Classic move. Bet she's after his cash." Grace's stomach dropped, her grip tightening on the rag until it hurt. Her face burned like she'd been slapped. Dylan. Of course he'd spread this garbage. She'd felt the stares all week. The cooks side-eyeing her, the maids whispering when she passed. But hearing it out loud cut deeper, a knife twisting in her gut. She wasn't some gold digger. She was just trying to survive, damn it. She ducked back into the parlor, her hands shaking as she wiped the fireplace, but the whispers clung to her like damp air, heavy and suffocating. By midday, she was upstairs, sweeping the hardwood in the long hallway, the bristles of her broom scraping a steady rhythm. Ethan's forest room caught her eye. The door cracked open, the green walls glowing faintly in the dim light. She stepped inside, the sharp smell of fresh paint still lingering, and ran her fingers over the beetle sheets folded on a chair. It was supposed to be a safe place for him, not a battleground. She closed her eyes, breathing in the quiet, when a crash shattered it, sharp and piercing, like glass hitting stone. Grace spun around, her heart lurching into her throat. Ethan stood in the doorway, his eyes wide with panic, his sketchbook clutched tight to his chest. At his feet lay the wooden music box from Saturday, Sarah's music box, splintered into pieces, the tiny metal inside spilling out across the floor like broken teeth. A faint, warped note tinkled once, then died. "Mama!" Ethan wailed, tears streaking his cheeks. "I didn't mean to!" "Ethan?" She dropped the broom and rushed to him, her pulse racing like a jackrabbit. "What are you doing here? Where's Miss Ruth?" "She had to go to the doctor," he sniffled, his little voice breaking. "She brought me here 'cause you were working. I just wanted to see my room." His lip trembled and he buried his face in her side. Grace's chest tightened, panic clawing at her. She knelt beside him, pulling him close, his sketchbook digging into her ribs. "It's okay, buddy. It's just a box. We'll fix this." But her mind was spinning. Miss Ruth dropping him off unannounced, the broken music box, the cost she couldn't possibly cover. Before she could catch her breath, heavy boots thumped up the stairs, and Dylan appeared, his smirk twisting into something uglier than she'd ever seen. "Well, well," he said, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "What's this mess? Your kid tearing the place apart now?" "He didn't mean it," Grace snapped, standing up and shielding Ethan, her voice sharp despite the tremor in her hands. "It was an accident." "Accident, huh?" Dylan stepped closer, kicking a shard of wood with his boot, the splinter skittering across the floor. "Expensive accident. That's one of Sarah's keepsakes. Worth more than you make in a year, I'd bet. Nathan's gonna love this." Grace's stomach churned, bile rising in her throat. "I'll pay for it. Just leave him out of this." "Oh, I'm sure you will," Dylan sneered, his voice dripping venom. "Or maybe you'll cry to Nathan, get him to foot the bill like he's been doing. Everybody knows you're his little pet now, you and that brat." "Stop it," she said, her voice trembling with fury. "I'm not—" "What's going on?" Nathan's voice cut through, firm and steady as a steel beam. He strode into the hall, his flannel shirt unbuttoned at the collar, his brow furrowed as he took in the scene. Ethan crying, Grace shaking, Dylan looming like a vulture over roadkill. Dylan turned, his smirk widening into something smug. "Your girl's kid just smashed up the place, boss. Told you she's trouble. Her and that little monster both." "Enough," Nathan snapped, his eyes flashing a warning Dylan didn't heed. He knelt by Ethan, his tone softening as he brushed a hand over the boy's hair. "You okay, little man?" Ethan nodded, hiccuping through tears. "I'm sorry, Mr. Nathan. It fell." "It's all right," Nathan said, standing up, his jaw tight as he faced Dylan. "Accidents happen. Back off." Dylan laughed, a cold, sharp sound that echoed down the hall. "You're blind, man. She's got you fooled, playing damsel so you'll keep bailing her out. First the rent, now this. She's bleeding you dry." Grace's face went hot, shame and fury crashing together like a thunderstorm. "That's not true!" she shouted, her voice cracking. Nathan's jaw clenched, his gaze locking on Dylan like a hawk on prey. "You're done here," he said, his voice low and final, each word a hammer strike. "Pack your stuff and get out. I don't need poison like you in my house." Dylan blinked, his smirk faltering, his face paling under the buzz cut. "You're firing me? Over her?" "Over you being a jackass," Nathan shot back, stepping closer, his broad shoulders squared. "Go." For a moment, Dylan just stood there, his face twisting with rage, his fists clenching at his sides. Then he spat on the floor, inches from Grace's sneakers, the wet thwack loud in the silence. "You'll regret this," he hissed, storming off, his boots pounding the stairs like a war drum. The air went still, the only sound Ethan's quiet sobs and the faint hum of the radio downstairs. Nathan turned to Grace, his expression softening, though his eyes still carried a flicker of anger. "You okay?" She couldn't answer. Her chest felt like it was caving in, Dylan's words ringing in her ears, bleeding you dry. She saw the broken music box, Ethan's tear-streaked face, Nathan's steady gaze, and it all crashed together like a wave she couldn't swim out of. "I can't do this," she choked out, grabbing Ethan's hand, her voice breaking. "I can't owe you my whole damn life, Nathan." "Grace, wait." He reached for her, but she yanked away, her fingers trembling around Ethan's. "No," she shouted, tears blurring her vision. "I'm not your fix-it project. I've got to stand on my own. Me and him." She pulled Ethan toward the stairs, her legs wobbly as jelly, her breath hitching in her chest. "Grace," Nathan called, his voice raw, but she didn't stop. She stumbled down the steps, Ethan clinging to her, his sketchbook thumping against his side, and burst out the front door into the muggy air. Rain had started falling, fat drops splattering her face, mixing with her tears. Ethan stumbled beside her, his little voice calling, "Mama, slow down!" But she couldn't. She had to get away. From Nathan, from the guilt, from the fear that she was losing herself all over again. Behind her, Nathan stood in the doorway, the broken music box glinting at his feet, its warped notes silent now. He didn't chase her, just watched her go. His shoulders slumped under the weight of her words, rain streaking the glass. Grace didn't stop until they reached the edge of the cornfields, her lungs burning, her shirt soaked through. She sank onto a patch of wet grass, pulling Ethan into her lap, his small body shivering against her. He was crying harder now, his face buried in her shoulder. "I'm sorry, Mama," he sobbed, his voice muffled. "I didn't mean to break it." "It's not your fault, buddy," she whispered, rocking him gently, her own tears falling into his hair. "None of this is your fault." She held him tight, the rain drumming on her back, a steady curtain that blurred the world beyond the fields. Her mind was a tornado. Dylan's smug face, the groundskeeper's whispers, Nathan's kindness twisting into something she couldn't carry. She'd wanted to stand on her own, to prove she didn't need anybody, but every step felt like quicksand pulling her under. Nathan firing Dylan should have felt like a win, but it didn't. It felt like a debt she'd never repay, a chain she couldn't break. The memory of Caleb hit her hard, his lazy grin as he pocketed her money, his boots crunching gravel as he left her sobbing in that apartment, 7 months pregnant and alone. She'd rebuilt from that, piece by piece, for Ethan. But now she was unraveling, threads slipping through her fingers, and she didn't know how to stop it. "Mama, are we going home?" Ethan asked, his voice small against the rain. "Yeah," she said, wiping her eyes with a shaky hand. "Let's go home." She stood, lifting him into her arms, and started the long walk back to their rental, the rain a relentless drumbeat on her shoulders. Every step felt heavier than the last, the cornfields swaying in the storm like silent witnesses. She didn't look back at the mansion, couldn't look back. All she could see was Caleb walking away, laughing as she begged him to stay, and now Nathan's kindness turning into a weight she couldn't bear. The rain didn't let up all night, hammering the tin roof of Grace Harper's rental like 1,000 tiny fists. She sat on the sagging couch in the dim glow of a thrift store lamp, Ethan curled up beside her under a patched quilt, his breathing slow and steady after crying himself to sleep. His sketchbook lay open on the coffee table, a half-finished drawing of fireflies smudged by damp fingerprints. Grace's eyes burned, raw from tears and exhaustion, her soaked clothes still clinging to her skin. The broken music box sat in a shoebox by her feet, its splintered pieces a jagged reminder of the mess she'd left behind at the Blackwell mansion. She couldn't stop replaying it. Dylan's sneer, the crash of wood on hardwood, Nathan's voice cutting through like a lifeline she'd refused to grab. She'd run because it felt like the only thing she could do, the only way to keep her and Ethan from sinking deeper into a debt she couldn't repay. Not with money, but with pieces of herself she wasn't ready to give. Caleb's ghost haunted her every thought, his laugh echoing as he'd walked away with her last $300, leaving her to pick up the shards of a life he'd shattered. She'd sworn never to lean on anyone again, but Nathan's kindness had crept under her walls, and now she was drowning in it. A sharp knock rattled the front door, jolting her out of her spiral. She glanced at the clock, 9:47 p.m. Too late for Miss Ruth. Too late for anyone who didn't mean trouble. Ethan stirred, mumbling in his sleep, and she eased off the couch, her heart thudding as she padded to the door in her socks. Through the peephole, she saw Maggie Sullivan, soaked to the bone, her gardening hat dripping water onto the porch. Grace yanked the door open, cold air rushing in with the rain. "Maggie? What the hell are you doing here?" Maggie stepped inside without waiting for an invite, shaking off her hat like a wet dog. "Had to see you, hun. Couldn't let this sit till morning." Her freckled face was tight, her green eyes sharp with something Grace couldn't read. Grace shut the door, crossing her arms over her damp t-shirt. "If it's about today, I don't want to hear it. I'm done with that place." Maggie sighed, dropping her hat on the arm of the couch. "You ain't done, Grace. You're just scared, and I get it. But you need to know something before you burn that bridge for good." She lowered her voice, glancing at Ethan's sleeping form. "Dylan wasn't just messing with you. He's been poisoning this place for years. Me, Hank, Lila, anybody who got close to Nathan. I caught him stealing tools once, back when I started, and he spread a rumor I was sleeping around to shut me up. Nearly got me canned." Grace blinked, her arms dropping to her sides. "What?" "Yeah," Maggie said, her voice hard. "He's got a chip on his shoulder bigger than this county. Years ago, his mom was dying, and he begged Nathan for cash to cover her bills, same as he's been judging you for. Nathan said no, kept it professional, and Dylan's hated him ever since. When you and Ethan showed up, he saw Nathan softening, and it drove him nuts. That music box? I'd bet my last dollar he set it up for Ethan to knock over. Saw him lingering in the hall before you got upstairs." Grace's knees buckled, and she sank back onto the couch, her head spinning. "You're saying he planned it?" "Damn right," Maggie said, sitting beside her, her wet overalls squeaking on the fabric. "Nathan checked the security cams after you left, caught Dylan sneaking in there earlier, moving that box to the edge. He's gone for good now, Grace. Nathan made sure of it." Grace stared at the shoebox, the splintered wood blurring through fresh tears. Dylan had set her up, used Ethan to break her, and she'd let him win, running like a scared kid instead of fighting back. "Why didn't Nathan tell me?" she whispered. Maggie shrugged, softening. "Probably didn't want to chase you down in the rain, looking like he's pushing. He's hurting too, hun. That box was Sarah's, yeah, but he wasn't mad at Ethan. He was mad at himself for letting Dylan get that far." Grace buried her face in her hands, the weight of it crashing down. Her fear, her pride, the walls she'd built to keep Ethan safe now boxing her in. "I screwed up, Maggie. I yelled at him, ran off. I can't go back there." "You can," Maggie said, squeezing her shoulder. "And you should. Nathan ain't Caleb. He's not trying to own you. He's trying to stand with you. Give him a chance to prove it." Grace lifted her head, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. The rain drummed on, softer now, a steady heartbeat against the night. She thought of Ethan's forest room, Nathan's quiet laugh, the note in Sarah's music box. Let this house be a haven. Maybe Maggie was right. Maybe running wasn't the answer anymore. The next morning broke clear, the sky a crisp blue over the wet fields, the air sharp with the smell of damp earth and corn. Grace stood outside the Blackwell mansion, Ethan's hand in hers, her stomach knotted tight as she stared at the oak doors. She'd barely slept, Maggie's words spinning through her head all night, but she'd made up her mind. She had to face this. For Ethan, for herself, maybe even for Nathan. She knocked, the sound hollow against the wood, and Nathan opened the door, his flannel shirt rumpled, a mug of black coffee steaming in his hand. His gray eyes widened, then softened, a flicker of relief breaking through the tired lines on his face. "Grace," he said, stepping aside. "Didn't expect you back so soon." She swallowed, her throat dry as dust. "Can we talk?" "Yeah," he said, nodding quick. "Come on in." They stepped into the foyer, Ethan clinging to her leg, his sketchbook tucked under his arm. Nathan led them to the kitchen, the big window letting in sunlight that danced on the granite counters. He set his mug down, leaning against the sink, his hands stuffed in his pockets. "Maggie told you, didn't she?" he asked, his voice low. Grace nodded, her fingers tightening around Ethan's. "About Dylan, the cameras. I didn't know." "I should have said something," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "But you were so mad, and I didn't want to make it worse. That box, it was Sarah's, yeah, but it's just a thing. You and Ethan, you're what matters." Her chest ached, tears pricking her eyes again. She took a shaky breath, stepping closer, Ethan trailing behind. "I'm sorry, Nathan. I freaked out. Ran 'cause I'm scared of needing anybody. Caleb left me with nothing, and I've been holding it together alone so long I don't know how to stop." "You don't have to," he said, his voice steady but soft, like a hand reaching out. "I'm not him, Grace. I'm not trying to fix you or own you. I want you and Ethan here with me. You're not a burden. You're a lifeline." Ethan tugged her hand, looking up with big wet eyes. "Mama, are we staying with Mr. Nathan?" Grace knelt, brushing his hair back, her heart twisting. "You want to stay, buddy?" He nodded fast, a small smile breaking through. "Yeah, he's my friend." She stood, meeting Nathan's gaze, the walls she'd built trembling under the weight of his quiet hope. "I don't know how to trust Nathan," she said, her voice cracking. "But I don't want to keep running either. Ethan needs this, and maybe I do too." Nathan's face broke into a smile, soft and real, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Then let's figure it out together. No rush, no pressure. Just us." An hour later, they stood in the garden, the damp grass cool under their feet. A small oak sapling cradled in Nathan's hands. Ethan bounced beside them, a tiny shovel clutched tight, his sneakers muddy from digging. "This is our tree, right?" he asked, grinning up at Nathan. "Yep," Nathan said, kneeling to set the sapling in the hole they'd dug. "Gonna grow big and strong, just like you." Grace watched, her hands in her pockets, the breeze tugging at her hair. The garden had been a tangle of neglect when she'd started here. Roses overgrown, weeds choking the paths. But today it felt alive, the earth rich and ready. They packed the dirt around the roots, Ethan giggling as mud squished between his fingers, Nathan guiding his hands with a patience that made her chest ache. When they finished, Nathan stepped back, brushing soil off his jeans. "Looks good," he said, glancing at her. "What do you think?" "It's a start," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips. "A good one." Back inside, Grace took Ethan to his forest room, the green walls still bright despite the chaos of yesterday. She grabbed a paintbrush and a can of yellow paint Nathan had left behind, her hand steady as she climbed a stool. With careful strokes, she painted a star above his bed, bold and jagged, like the crack in her ceiling back home, but this time it felt different. "This is our mark," she said, stepping down, her voice firm. "Not just yours, Nathan. Ours too." Ethan clapped, his muddy hands leaving prints on his shirt. "It's the best star ever, Mama." Nathan leaned in the doorway, watching with a quiet grin. "It's perfect." That night, after Ethan crashed in his new room, Grace sat with Nathan in the kitchen, a mug of tea steaming between her hands. The house was quiet, just the hum of the fridge and the faint chirp of crickets outside. "He's out like a light," she said, sipping the tea, the warmth settling her nerves. "Good," Nathan replied, his own mug cradled in his hands. "Kid's a tornado," she chuckled, then hesitated, her fingers tracing the mug's rim. "Thanks, Nathan, for not giving up on us." He met her gaze, his eyes soft but steady. "Never was an option. This house, it's yours, as much as mine now. We'll build it together, one day at a time." She nodded, her throat tight, and for the first time in years, the weight on her shoulders felt lighter. Not gone, but shared. Later, as she tucked Ethan in, he stirred, his voice sleepy. "Mama, mister?" "Nathan said he's making me a bug house tomorrow." Grace smiled, brushing his hair back. "That's so? Sounds like a plan." She stepped into the hall, closing the door softly, and paused, looking out the window at the garden. The oak sapling stood small but stubborn against the night, its roots sinking into the earth. She pictured Ethan running through the grass, maybe with friends someday, his laughter filling the air. It wasn't a family yet, not fully, but it was a start, a promise she could hold on to. For the first time in forever, Grace let herself believe it might last. "Hey, y'all, Grace and Nathan planted more than a tree. They're growing something real. What'd you think of their journey? Hit that subscribe button and drop a comment with your favorite moment. I'm dying to hear what hit you hardest. Thanks for riding this roller coaster with me. Let's keep sharing stories that matter."